Now to another tragic story. We're learning more about the deadly shooting at a hockey rink in Rhode Island yesterday. We now have footage from inside the arena, and warning, this may be intense for some viewers. Authorities confirmed that Robert Dorgan opened fire at a senior hockey night for local students, killing 2 family members and wounding 3 others. Court records show that Dorgan, who called himself Roberto Esposito, reported having some form of transgender surgery. Officials had this to say.
Was there some sort of transgender process happening?
So that really is kind of irrelevant to our investigation at this point.
But is that irrelevant here? Many would say it's totally relevant. It's hard to gloss over the fact that there have been a number of very high-profile murders in the past year or two where the suspect identified as transgender. Just as the media does when a shooter is a young white male, it should be okay to point this out. Less than 1 week ago, 8 students at a school in British Columbia were killed in a shooting carried out by an 18-year-old former student who identified as transgender. Last August, a transgender-identifying gunman shot more than 30 students and teachers, killing 2 children at a Catholic school in Minneapolis. And in March 2023, 3 students and 3 staff members at a Christian school in Nashville were shot and killed by a transgender biological woman. So the question is this: is there a pattern here? And if so, why is this pattern occurring? And does it have something to do with the treatments that people are being given? At NewsNation, we do not shy away from these kinds of conversations. We tackle them head on. So let's get to it. Let's bring in host of the Mom Wars podcast host, Bethany Mandel, and host of the Brad versus Everyone podcast, Brad Polumbo. Thank you so much for both of you to be here tonight. Bethany, you've covered this story, these kinds of stories for a long time. You wrote in the wake of the latest shooting in Canada that the media need to stop gaslighting us about the reality of trans mass shooters and said it is cowardice to avoid talking about it or questioning whether it's more than a coincidence. So let's hear your thoughts about what we're hearing about this latest story coming out of Rhode Island.
Yeah, so we're not hearing much because it doesn't fit a very convenient narrative. After what happened in British Columbia, I saw the New York Times refer to the shooter as a she. The Reuters reporting did the same. This is a pattern that happens in the media. They decide that they're going to use the preferred pronouns of the shooter, and they're going to honor that person's mental illness by doing so. And I argue in that column, and I've been arguing for years, that this is a symptom of mental illness, severe mental illness. When you think that you are the opposite gender and start dressing and acting a different way, that is a signal that you're in distress. And the responsible thing to do in that circumstance, if you are a family member, if you are someone in the mental health field, is not to affirm that mental illness, but instead to treat it. But that's not what happens in America in 2026. And so this is what happens in America and Canada in 2026. We see attacks like these, and they're not going to stop if we don't stop affirming these beliefs instead of treating them.
Brad, the authorities in Rhode Island say that this was irrelevant, the fact that this person identified as transgender, to their investigation and to their press conference. But Roberta Dorgan did say to the police before that they underwent gender assignment surgery and that his father-in-law wanted him out of the house because of it. There was a family dispute over this, and his wife, in divorce filings, cited gender reassignment surgery and narcissistic personality disorder traits as a reasons to get divorced that was then amended to reconcilable differences. So does it do anybody a service by kind of washing out what's actually going on here, especially in divorce documents, from someone who's clearly saying this is why I'm getting divorced?
No, I think certainly not. I think we should be honest about talking about these things, and I appreciate that. But what I will say is it could be irrelevant to this individual and to this sick person who did this horrifying shooting. I've sat in those very stands in Rhode Island where I grew up, watching hockey games many times, so it was really chilling and horrifying stuff. But I'm bothered by this, of course, first and foremost, for just the human toll of everyone involved and the people touched by this trauma and this tragedy. But I'm also disturbed by what I do see as a collective demonization of transgender people on the right more broadly right now. You know, there's more than 2 million adults that identify as transgender. And when we're talking about this series of incidents where shooters may or may not have identified as transgender, it's 7 people. It's less than 10 people out of millions. And I think that's important to remember. It's 0.0004% of these trans-identified individuals and adults, according to the Williams Institute, the millions that are out there that have engaged in any such kind of thing. Suddenly I see conservatives on my timeline cheering for gun control against millions of people, or acting like an entire community of millions of people is a dangerous, violent threat coming to get your kids tomorrow. I have pushed back on a lot of the excesses of transgender activism, but I also believe in the Second Amendment, believe in individual rights, and don't believe in identity politics and collective demonization. But we're seeing a lot of that right now.
So, Bethany, there are big questions about the science behind some of the treatments that are given for what we've been told to call gender-affirming care. There's been a lot of pushback of even asking questions about powerful hormones that people are taking and whether they change someone's psyche or make them more violent. There are plenty of drugs on the market that give side effects of danger to self, suicidal, violent tendencies that we've seen. We're allowed to ask questions about other kinds of drugs, but it seems like when it comes to gender-affirming care, we're not supposed to ask whether it's making people more violent.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the drugs that are making people who already have pre-existing mental illness more violent. I think it certainly doesn't help. But we're also sending them a message that they are under siege, that they are a marginalized group and a marginalized community, and they have to batten down the hatches to protect themselves because they are under threat constantly. And when you send that message to people who are amped up on hormones, who already have pre-existing mental illness, that is a recipe for disaster. And yes, there's only, quote unquote, been 7 mass shooters who have been transgender in the last year. That's not a great number. That's not a small and insignificant number.
That's going back years.
Let her finish.
But we're also thinking about the fact that our friend Charlie Kirk was murdered by someone who believed in the same ideology. This is part of a mass psychosis where we believe that this is possible, that you can put on a dress and become a different gender. And it's wrong, and it has consequences, and we're seeing these consequences play out in the last month, week after week after week, and it's not going to stop.
So, Brad, you've argued in the past that this is a live and let live situation where we shouldn't be regulating this. You just made an argument about that. But what about people who feel like this is something that they're being forced to accept, maybe not in the sense of, shootings in public places, but this does extend to other areas of life, not just to family scenarios who may have a dispute within their family about someone deciding that they're going to identify as transgender. Of course, we've had men in women's locker rooms. We've had men in women's shelters, battered women's shelters. We, of course, have the women's sports issue. So should there be any guardrails around this issue at all?
Of course, absolutely. We should have all of those conversations. I've pushed back on a lot of those excesses myself, but there are some people who have this persistent experience of gender dysphoria, and they're not going anywhere. Many of these adults, many of them are decent people who contribute to their communities. And the fact that there are some deranged, sick individuals out there who glom onto this label and this identity, and then they go into these online cesspools of radicalism, and some of them go out and do horrific things, is terrible and should be addressed. But I'm witnessing widespread cruelty and collective demonization of this group of people. And I'm just struck by the fact that it's all being done. I mean, I'm old enough to remember facts don't care about your feelings. I mean, there is not a single statistic being cited. All of the actual statistics from the Gun Violence Archive, the Violence Prevention Project that look at mass shootings, find trans people are underrepresented, not over. There's not a single statistic people are citing.
But it's hard to get statistics when they are not honest. When law enforcement is not honest about someone's gender, it's hard to get a statistic.
That's exactly correct. All right, thank you both for this conversation. We hope to have you back for more. Bethany and Brad, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.